Hey, scrappers and recyclers, it's Shark Scrapper. Little different look and feel to today's video. Instead of being in the shark cage breaking down something and talking about what we find, I thought that it would be worthwhile to spend a little time talking about what's going on in the world of tariffs and trade. Now remember, this is not a politics channel. There's plenty of places where you can go and listen to or discuss the politics of what's going on. I want to focus on what does it mean for us in the scrapping and recycling world. So please do your best to not make any political comments, but please do make comments relative to what it means to us as scrappers and recyclers, in particular what you see in the way of pricing at your yards and from your buyers and such. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to discuss what is a tariff. In its simplest sense, a tariff is a tax that is applied to an importer of a good. All right, so somebody imports something from another country, the tariff or the tax is charged, and that importer pays that tax. Most importers will treat that as a cost for the good and therefore pass it on either in whole or part to the consumer or whoever is buying that thing from them. So you can see how that flows down to the consumers. Now, why do tariffs exist? Well, historically, tariffs were used to help a country level the playing field or make things easier, or at least establish an environment where domestic producers could compete against other international producers. In the United States, we use tariffs for two main reasons when we were created as a nation. For a long time, tariffs were how we funded the U.S. government. But more than that, tariffs were a way for Congress to create a playing field where U.S. manufacturers, industries could get started and become strong and then be able to compete on the international stage. So that makes a lot of sense. Early in the U.S. history, we didn't have a big industrial complex. We were trying to catch up to Europe. It made a lot of sense. Plus, it was a good way to raise revenues for the nation. In 1962, the U.S. government decided things needed to be more complicated. So in 1962, they created the Trade Expansion Act, and that, among other things, gave the president the authority to adjust imports if it was determined that excessive foreign imports are found to threaten U.S. national security. And the way that was implemented is through, literally, it's Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. So you're going to hear me and a lot of other people talk about Section 232 or the Expansion Trade Act tariffs. So in simplest terms, the way that works is the Department of Commerce will conduct an investigation and they will determine if an import is of such quantity that it risks national security. And if it does, then the Department of Commerce will release a report that says we conducted this investigation, here's what we determined, and here's our recommendations on how to mitigate the risk to U.S. national security. And one of the tools that, actually the two main tools that are available are tariffs and then quotas. So literally limit the amount of that material that would be coming in. So that's where we find ourselves today. We have a mixed bag of tariffs that are going on. And I have, because I'm a member of REMA, the Recycled Materials Association, formerly known as ISRI, and I've been doing a bunch of research since the tariffs were announced. we've got a lot of information here. Some of it is going to be confusing. So I'm going to try to lay it out in a way that will help all of you understand, at least be able to wrap your heads around what's going on. So we're going to get back to Section 232 in a minute. But first I want to talk about what the various tariffs are that have recently been implemented. Now, the first one, that the sort of like the base level, is the universal tariff. That's a 10% duty applied across the board to all countries, except Canada and Mexico. And it's effective on April 5th. The other exception is on things that are already tariffed, such as Section 232. All right. Then there are the reciprocal tariffs. Now, the reciprocal tariffs are at a rate above 10%, and they vary by country. So there's around 75 countries, including EU members, but again, it excludes Canada and Mexico. And it is also on most goods, including some recycled materials, such as steel and aluminum, but it excludes goods that are subject to tariffs, to other tariffs. So again, like the Section 232 that we're going to talk about, or energy and critical mineral products not available to the U.S. And these take effect on April 9. Now, here's an example of some of the reciprocal duty rates that are being applied. And I sort of picked out ones that represent those of you who generally watch my channel. So United Kingdom, 10%, Germany, 20%, China, 34%, Australia, 10%, India, 26%, France, 20%. Now, that's as of the date of this recording. That could always change. There are 6 specific exclusions to these reciprocal tariffs. Articles subject to 50 U.S. Code 1702 Bravo. And I know everybody knows that, right? You all know what that is? No, I don't blame you, right? That is the president's authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers, known as, you may hear it sometimes referred to as IEEPA, IEEPA. The other exception is steel, aluminum, and autos and auto parts that are subject to 232 tariffs. Another exemption, these are specific to copper, pharmaceutical, semiconductors, and lumber articles. Now, we're going to get back to that in a minute. Right now, they are exempt. But there's a reason why they're exempt, okay? So hang on. All articles that may become subject to future 232 action, look back to the articles that I just mentioned, copper, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, et cetera. Bullion is number 5, and number 6 is energy and certain minerals that are not available in the United States. So it's important to understand that the items that are excluded, copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and lumber articles, could become a 232 tariff item or controlled item. And in fact, copper is currently under investigation. So remember I said that under a Section 232 tariff or control, the Department of Commerce conducts an investigation. They determine the national security risk of that, whatever it is. In this case, we're talking copper. And then they make recommendations. Should there be tariffs? Should there be limits? How are you going to control this? And then the president can enact those recommendations. So copper could get tariffed in the future. Now, how do you know what is being controlled and what isn't? Well, if you're in this business, you've already got links to all of the government sites and stuff. But there's a 10-digit code. It's a harmonized trade code, HTS code, and you can look it up. Now, for copper specifically, what we're talking about is 7404.00.30, which is copper spent anodes, copper waste and scrap containing less than 94% by weight of copper, And then the other code is 7404.00.60, which is copper waste and scrap containing 94% or more by weight of copper. All right, now there's also other recycled materials. They're included: platinum, zinc, tungsten, magnesium, cobalt, the list goes on, titanium, goes on. If you're running a big yard, you already know how to go figure this out. You've got people that are giving you this information. If you're a hobby scrapper or a small-time scrapper, recycler, it's not going to matter because you're probably not selling internationally. But I just want to make you understand that there is a very complex mechanism that has to be stepped through in order to say, yes, this thing, this widget, this whatever, has to have a tax or a duty paid on it when it comes into the U.S. Okay, now we talked about IEEPA. The White House has specifically left IEEPA tariffs against Canada and Mexico in place, but that also includes the exemptions for what's referred to as USMCA compliant goods. What, you don't know what USMCA compliant goods are? Come on, you call yourselves scrappers? Hey, look, I don't blame you. Really, I mean, unless you're deep into the business of this, you're probably not going to know what all these things are, and that's okay. That's what I'm trying to help you understand here. Right? And I mean, you know, even those who do understand this are constantly going back to the books to try to understand it. USMCA is the US-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement. It replaced NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, back in 2020. USMCA manages the trade between Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and it is based on rules of origin, labor standards, how much is made where kind of thing. So again, it's one of those complex mechanisms, but the idea was that trade could move more freely between the United States, Mexico, and Canada with this agreement in place, and support the various complex supply chains that have allowed things to get made in all three countries and come together someplace. We see this a lot with automobiles. There are piece parts that are made in Canada, in Mexico, that come together and turn into a car in the United States. So the USMCA compliant protocols are still in place. That means that some things have a lower duty, some things are preferred, some things have no duty. You know, there's again, you got to go back to the books and you have to look at the specific numbers so that people know what they're paying. Now, this is what's in place right now. This can always change. Recycled products. Some recycled materials are included in the universal and the reciprocal tariffs, unless they are specifically excluded because they're covered in the Section 232 tariff. So steel and aluminum are subject to the 232 tariffs, along with autos and automobiles. And copper is currently being investigated. Now, this prevents, so this is why in some cases you're going to hear people say that recycled material is not being tariffed. Other people will say it is. Again, it all depends on what tariff regime you're talking about. If it and where that particular item falls in the specific regime. A very interesting question came up about copper in a teleconference yesterday with the members of REMA, the Recycled Materials Association. One of the copper companies asked the question, if copper is being investigated for Section 232 controls, could the administration not only put tariffs on it or limits on how much can come in, but could they also put limits on how much can be exported or who it can be exported to? And the answer is yes, absolutely. The U.S. frequently puts national defense protocols and limits on materials, defense-related materials being exported. Will they? Is the question. And right now, lobby groups, REMA lobbies for the scrapping industry. That's part of what REMA does. That's one of the reasons why people join REMA. So REMA is providing information to the U.S. government, Department of Commerce, to try to convince them that they should not limit the export of copper. In fact, they're trying to get copper, exemptions in place so that it doesn't impact recycled copper, so that any of the tariffs don't impact recycled copper. The argument is that we, the United States, export a lot of recycled material, recycled copper being another one of the things that we export. That brings money into the country. It provides for jobs. So U.S. government, please do not limit that. Will they? Yeah, we'll see. We don't know yet. There's no way of knowing. So you've got these tariff regimes that could add cost to things that are coming into the United States, and that might include some recycled materials. And you're probably saying, well, okay, so, how much recycled content, what's that really going to do? Well, if you're paying more for recycled copper or recycled aluminum, whatever, coming into the United States, that might make the value of domestic secondary aluminum or domestic secondary copper, it might make that more valuable. So we could potentially see the value of our scrap materials increase as a result at some point in the future. Not happening right now. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But it could help us in the long term. But here's the other unknown. Who's going to retaliate? China has already said that they will retaliate against the United States. Canada and Mexico have made very clear that they're going to retaliate against these U.S. tariff regimes. How big is it going to be targeted? Is it going to be across the board? We're still learning about how those retaliatory measures will apply. The EU is also likely to retaliate. Now, again, mind you that the U.S. government has gone out and said, if you retaliate, we'll retaliate again. And so there's the potential for this to turn into a trade war, which will significantly drive up the cost of things until people settle down. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. And that can change things in very short notice. And so you got to pay attention to how that's going to impact what can go on. But the good news for us as scrappers and recyclers is that most of our material tends to then become the building blocks of other stuff. So aluminum, the scrap aluminum, the scrap copper, the scrap steel, from maybe at the yard we took it to, but only one or two levels beyond, can usually end up in a mill and get refined and turned into secondary aluminum, secondary copper, the stuff that gets used to make things domestically. And some of it does get exported. None of these regimes, these tariff regimes in the U.S. right now, put a tax on the exported goods, but other nations will put a tax on that. They will tariff the exported goods. So other nations may drive up the cost of recycled aluminum, copper, and stuff. But, one would argue, well, that's good for us, right? Because it's going to make the copper more expensive. However, if it costs more to move that, if that copper is more expensive going offshore, then, well, the yards may pay less because it's costing them more. If in the general tariff regime, it costs more for people to live because our consumer goods become a lot more expensive or potentially more expensive, those scrap yards need to pay their employees and their staff more. And if they're going to pay their employees and their staff more, that can reduce what they can pay us for scrap materials. If the cost of energy or the things that they need to keep their facilities running goes up, Again, they have to offset that somewhere. But if the cost of the material becomes more expensive, then they can afford to pay us more. So you can see that this becomes a very complex economics question, and right now there is no clarity at all. If you look at what's going on out there, it's hard. You just don't know what's going on. Let's take a look real quick at what's going on for gold. We see that here's the trading economics gold chart for today. This is a one-day chart. We see that we peaked up here at 0715, and then it started crashing. It was dropping. It gets down to 3016 and comes back up, and then it's trying to sell out here. It's trying to find a place. What's happening is that a lot of investors sold gold to cover the losses from other investments, and at some point that stops and the investors are back to going into gold as a safe haven, and the price of gold would then logically come back up again. So let's just go ahead and here take a look at the one-year chart and then the forecast. And you can see that gold starts to, for the long term, that the trading economics is saying it's going to be back up again over 3,000, somewhere in the 3,250 range. Now, of course, they being the investors like at Trading Economics, they're still trying to digest everything that's going on. So it's hard to know with any certainty, but because gold and silver are safe haven kind of investments, we would logically expect that it will recover and start going back up in times of economic uncertainty. Let's take a look at copper real quick, because that's one of the things that we get really interested in as scrappers. We can very clearly see the drop off here in copper. This is the 1 year chart, and you can see copper crashing here. That would be very scary to look at. Let's go for the 1 week look at this. So here we are for the week. It's copper's sort of holding at a good high level around $5. Here's the announcement of the tariffs, and we see that copper takes an immediate crash. We have a little bit of a recovery, and then it's fallen off. And what's driving this is uncertainty. This is pure economic uncertainty that is driving it. And copper, being an industrial metal, does not go into a safe haven status like gold, so it's crashing because manufacturers just aren't sure what's going to happen, how this is going to play out. Probably what would expect to see is that things settle out. The tariffs eventually settle out. Manufacturers adjust their supply chains. We get back to making things, and prices probably start coming up again. Because let's face it, we need copper. We need, to continue, and we need to make things, and we need to invest in infrastructure and those kind of things. And copper is a critical part of that. So let's see, if we take the 1 year chart again and we go to the forecast, and we see this sharp rise again back up to $5.50. But let's be real, the investors, the people at Trading Economics and all of the forecasting places, they haven't had time to digest all of this, and there's going to be a lot of things going on here as countries act and react and retaliate and so I wouldn't put a whole lot of confidence or faith in this 550 long-term figure, but I think we could safely say that at some point copper will start going back up merely because we have to keep making things. We're either going to offset our refined or primary copper with secondary copper, or we're just going to pay more money for it. But one way or another, copper is probably going to go back up, which is probably a good thing for us in the scrapping industry. So what does this mean for us in the scrap and recycling world? Don't panic. I mean, that's the number one thing that I would say to you right now. Don't panic. If you need to sell material for cash flow, then continue to sell your material for cash flow. Your yards may or may not have to adjust their prices based on their contracts, when their contracts expire, what their contracts say. They may hold prices for a while because they have that flexibility. They may have to lower them at some point just because the economics drive that. And as their contracts expire and they're negotiating new contracts, that's going to drive their pricing. Smaller yards may be more volatile than the larger international yards, simply because a lot of the smaller yards aren't going to have the long-term contracts that stabilize their pricing, or who they sell to has to change because of the way the markets play out. But for the vast majority of those of you that watch my channel, if you have to sell for cash flow, then sell for cash flow. If you don't have to sell, especially for copper, if you don't have to sell, then hold it back. Usually when things aren't in turmoil, usually what I recommend is that you always hold at least 10% back and, look for those highs in the markets and then use that 10% as a strategic reserve to take advantage of those highs. At this point, because there's so much turmoil and chaos out there right now, if you don't have to sell your copper, then hold on to it. Set it aside, let it accumulate, and see if you can't take advantage of when the markets settle out and turn around and the copper prices come back up. The most important thing is do not panic sell. Do not say to yourself, oh my God, the sky is falling, copper's dropping, I got to get rid of all my copper, because that's when you're going to lose money in the long term. So again, if you have to sell for cash flow purposes, then by all means sell to meet your cash flow. But otherwise, maybe hang on to what you can. In particular, for the electronics, market, printed circuit boards, when we shouldn't expect to see anything change too fast. Most of the yards that are buying PCBs are probably not too spooked just yet. They might have to lower prices here, if gold gets down below 3,000 again and keeps dropping, then yeah, they'll probably lower their prices. But if a little bit of drop, they're going to hold off because it'll probably climb back up again. So if you see your yard has dropped their price on boards, then yeah, if you can, you might want to wait it out a little bit because it'll probably come back up again. Just because gold is that safe haven and printed circuit boards, electronic scrap is predominantly valued by the gold content. Now that's I'm not talking about necessarily the power supply units or the low grade boards, which tend to be more copper weighted in value, but your CPUs, your other printed circuit boards, certainly your mid and higher grade materials, they tend to be driven by gold prices. So those are the ones that you would logically expect that they're going to come up. If they come down, hold on to them, wait for them to come back up again, because they probably will. But again, if you need the cash flow, then you're selling into whatever the market bears at the time. The most important thing that I want to recommend is don't panic. Do what you have to do to meet your cash flow. If you can hold back copper or gold material, do so. But most of all, don't panic. There's going to be a lot of chaos for a while. You're going to see, most likely, the reciprocal tariffs causing retaliatory effects from the international community, which would lead to more reciprocal tariffs. Yes, this is going to increase the costs on us as the consumers. And that could create a situation where if you are a full-time scrapper, you may not be able to afford to carry on as just a full-time scrapper. You may have to find a full or part-time job to get a steady income in order to afford to live, because there's going to be so many changes to the scrap value, and yet at the same time your cost of your basic consumer goods is going to continue to rise for a while, possibly quite a bit. So there may be an impact on those of you that are full-time scrappers. Certainly businesses like mine that are small electronic scrap or recycling businesses, yeah, we've got some challenges going on here. Now, fortunately, because I'm focused on electronic scrap, I am somewhat insulated from the short-term chaos of what's going on. And because most of what I sell is driven by gold prices, it should probably be okay. So hang in there. Don't panic. Please leave your comments about what you're seeing happening at your scrapyard and how you see the prices changing at your scrapyard. Remember, this is not a politics channel, so don't make politically motivated comments. Let's talk about what we're really seeing the tariffs do to the prices and the impact on us as recyclers and scrappers. We will be talking a lot about this in my Sunday live streams, where every week we talk about what's going on with industrial metals and precious metals and the world that surrounds that. And right now, tariffs have a huge impact on our precious and industrial metals. So we'll have a lot more discussion going on during the Sunday live stream. But I wanted to try to get this out to you all as quickly as I could to help you better understand all of these different tariffs. And when they talk about Section 232, what they mean, or IEEPA, what they mean, or USMCA. So hopefully I've helped you have a little better understanding of all the different tariff regimes that are out there right now and what it means to you, so that as you see all of the news discussions, you can do a little better job of getting your head wrapped around what it all means to you. Feel free to leave any comments that you want for clarification, and I look forward to seeing you all out there on the Sunday live stream, so we're going to talk about this a lot more. Have a great day, everybody.